lockdown of all that information is really important to convey. And it's also important to have people who work for the census who are part of the community. So if we're still hiring, what I heard is that if over the whole period, it's about another $6,000 that a person could earn if you add up all the time. So, you know, not nothing. So you might want to think about that if you've got the time and you've got the will to make an honest count. I'm going to stop. We have about, what time we're going to have? We've got time for questions, so let's go. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Paula Roderick. Thank you.
Oh, that's right. We've got one of those mics for you guys. Yeah.
Thank you, Jan. I'm Paula Roderick, and thank you first off for your work for women, for children, for immigrants. I have been a longtime member, resident here in the district, and also a supporter. And my question to you is in response to a letter that I sent last year, asking you to co-sponsor HR 2407, which is Betty McCollum's bill, promoting human rights to Palestinian children living under Israeli military detention. You know, you responded, this is August of 2019, that you were not inclined to support the bill because of the way it was drafted and possible outcomes. And I think you have shifted some of your thinking about the problems around information that you had received regarding the treatment of Palestinian children. But it's my understanding you're still hesitant to support HR 2407. So this is my question to you, is I understand and have heard that you're talking about proposing another counter bill that also would look at addressing the rights of Palestinian children who are subjected to military detention. But if you do that, I'm going to ask you, would you first consider making a trip to occupied Palestine and to Israel to meet with the children who are subjected to military detention and their parents, the people that have been watching the courts, and the lawyers before you make your decision about what kind of bill you want to propose?
Well, I came back recently from Israel. I was there in November on a trip with J Street. Some of you may be familiar with that. And spent at least half of our time in occupied Palestine, and have been a tremendous critic. I mean, let me just, I'll get to that, but I just want to say, this so-called peace plan that was just offered by our president, who was impeached, and the Bibi Netanyahu, who is right now the prime minister, who is under possible indictment, offered a plan for the region, for all of, for Israel and the West Bank, that they call the peace plan, without ever having a single person representing the Palestinians at the table. And it's just, and also plans that would annex a good deal of the West Bank, really making a two-state solution impossible. Okay. I've had many meetings and many discussions about this particular bill. Understand that all of the money that goes from the United States to Israel is for military purposes. And so it is, and it's hard to distinguish money. In other words, to cut off money for some kind of incarceration of children. I absolutely 100% oppose the incarceration of minors. And that includes, by the way, here in the United States of America, where immigrant children are, and I have been there as well, to the border 3 times, and saw children separated, and parents who've been separated, and grandparents, because they're not considered family, from children that they've raised. It's horrifying. But this legislation, which is not going to be considered in the Congress right now, is not going to achieve its goals. Let me give you an example of something that we think will achieve, could possibly achieve its goal, a bill that I'm almost ready to introduce. So the destruction of people's homes is also happening in occupied territories in the homes of Palestinians. And I've been to villages that are under orders to be wiped out. And what equipment are they using? Are any of the bulldozers that they're using part of the money that we send to Israel for security purposes only? And if we can document that U.S. paid for bulldozers are being used, we actually could decrease that money from our contribution and our memorandum of understanding with how much we're going to give. So connecting the money to so-called military aid, we could do that. A statement of Congress that we oppose Israeli incarceration of children, I could support that in a minute. It's the, what's impossible, I think, is putting into language that we're going to decrease the amount of money we give because it wouldn't work.
I just want to respond briefly because I've been there too. And I do know it is very hard when you meet with children, and they're holding the canister, the tear gas canister, or they're holding product that's bought from the U.S. because it says made in the U.S. So if Palestinians can see that, then we can ask Israel to account for it. That's all I'm thinking. It's there, it's made in the U.S., we're seeing it for the children, they know, and they're looking at us going, how are we allowing this? That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
Yeah, actually, I read a couple of letters that you sent back to people who had asked about this bill, and it seems to me that if you start talking about tying a particular dollar to a particular piece of equipment, that can't work either, because money's fungible and so are bulldozers. So that if I don't want to use a military bulldozer, I could just swap that out for one that says Caterpillar on it. So it seems to me that you could have a much tighter logic in the bill that says, if you imprison one child, we don't give you any money for military aid. I mean, it's so simple that all we have to do, and we've got people monitoring the practices of the Israeli Defense Forces who are gathering up these children and putting them in military prisons, trying them in military courts where they're almost certainly to be convicted and left in jail for a long, long time. Any argument that doesn't just go straight to the problem and say, if you do this, you get no support from us. Now, that's got to be like a 5-sentence bill, and it's easy to enforce.
Anybody else?
There's not a question, I'm sorry.
Can I ask a question? When you're talking about environmental pollution, and my question to you is, maybe not participating in the Olympics every year and things that we just fly around. I mean, I have,
Here, take the mic.
I want to address environmental pollution. So in order to address that, my concern is that we don't get involved in worldwide competition events and things like that. I mean, I have a hard time finding the best restaurant in Evanston let alone finding like the best person in the world. That's, because we're all, good at what we do, but what are you doing in Congress to support local competition, local businesses, more local economies?
I thought it was did you say it was an environmental question?
Regarding pollution of flying and cars.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I can definitely connect the issue of environmental issues to jobs. We continue in this country every year to subsidize, believe it or not, the oil and gas industry. Billions of dollars to go to subsidize fossil fuels. If we would invest in clean energy, there are literally millions of jobs that could be created with these new technologies in our own communities, that we could not only make our carbon emissions go down, but we could sell these technologies all over the world. But right now, there is total resistance to the idea, even the idea, that we have to act in an urgent manner on the issue of global warming, of climate change. I spoke to a class of 8th graders today at the McCutcheon School in Chicago, and they had written me, each of them had written me a letter. I answered their letter, but then I went to visit them as well. And these kids are so worried about what, at this moment in our history, the history of the world, it is fair to ask the question, will the earth be able to sustain life as we know it? And yet, the United States of America has added more carbon emissions into the atmosphere. We're going in the wrong direction. We're not even on a small decline. There was a tiny decline in 2018. But other than that, since this administration, we have seen carbon emissions go up. I mean, this is a climate crisis right now that we have to address. And I'm on a subcommittee on environment and climate. We talk a lot about jobs, for example, because one of the big arguments that we get is, oh, if we do something about coal mining, or we do something about fracking and extracting more oil, all these people are going to be out of work, so we can't do it. Iowa now, much of its energy is from windmills, which have to be manufactured, which have to be made as well, and can sustain jobs. And there's so much opportunity. Other countries are getting ahead of us in producing these solar panels, like in China, and we could be the leader in the world and save our lives. Up for a Nobel Peace Prize is Greta Thunberg. She's 17 years old. She's been an activist for 4 years, since she's 13 years old, on the issue of climate. I had the privilege of meeting her. She came to the United States. Greta is known for standing up before the United Nations, leaders of the entire world, and just saying, you should be ashamed of yourself. You should be ashamed of yourself. The way that she talks and the courage that she shows is so incredibly remarkable. But I tell these kids, let's see, how old are they in 8th grade? 13, 14 years old. This is really your century. This is it. And scientists have said we have between 10 and 11 years before we reach a point where the global warming effects can't be reversed. And so I don't want to make it political, except to say elections really matter, and decide the direction that we're going to move. And I want to say also, those of you who are near at all to the Des Plaines River, you know, it used to be 500-year floods, and now they're coming every other year because of climate action. If I lived closer to the lake in Evanston, there's no beaches. The beaches are gone because the height of the lake is so high. The mayor of Chicago said it's a result of climate change. We are finding cities. How about going to Venice? Underwater much of the time now. I mean, I don't know if there's going to be a Venice in a few more years if this continues. Australia and California have been burning. I'm so happy they finally have in Australia the wildfires under control, at least. But millions and millions of acres have been destroyed. This is climate change. People are migrating because of they're climate refugees. The land will no longer grow crops that they need to feed their families. It's happening in Central America, and it's happening in Africa. It's happening around the world, that we are seeing more migrants, people moving because they can't stay where they're at. It's now, it is not in, you know, the next century or in 50 years. And it's so frustrating when we can't get, we still hear that it's an expensive hoax. That it's an expensive hoax, this thing about climate. So there's so many advantages, including our children and grandchildren living long lives, to doing something now about the planet. What else? Anybody? Yes, sir.
We have a microphone here?
Yeah, microphone coming. Hands on her way.
There we go.
Yes, I feel like you do about we have to have a much better environment. But I also think, you know, that we have to realize it as a very global matter, because I understand, I've seen charts that show that most of the CO2 now comes from China and India, and the amount of pollution that comes out of the Chinese rivers or the rivers from Indonesia and Egypt is way more than what's coming out of the United States now. And this young lady, Greta Thunberg, you know, like Joan Esposito, you often point to her, and I wonder if she's going to go to China, you know, to talk about her message. You know.
So China actually is part of the accord, and is you know, has plans at least to deal with it. But the United States is often looked to as a leader in the world on so many different fronts. That has been our historic role. And we may not be number one right now, but we're right up there. It's not a huge difference. And of course, you know, we're a country of 300 million people, and we're talking about countries with 1 billion. Yeah, I mean, and more. And so absolutely it's an issue, but how can we then go and preach to the world that in order to save us all, that we have to do something when we are not, as policy. Now, that's not to say that the private sector isn't doing more, that there aren't more jobs and businesses growing around renewables and clean energy, but as a country, this is not public policy anymore right now. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous. Any questions about, I
Back
don't know,
here.
anything?
And back here.
Me.
There's a question right here?
Yes,
back
please.
here.
Then-
Oh, sorry.
Okay, go ahead. Okay, my name is Syed. You know me very well. The thing that happened in India. Okay, Mr. Modi, he's a friend of Mr. Trump. He's doing very bad thing with his minorities for
Who is?
citizenship.
Prime Minister Modi.
Mr. Modi is doing very bad thing with minorities, especially with the Christian, Muslim, Sikhs, and he's like it changes the constitution. Do you have a plan to do something for him, because Trump is going next week to see him?
Who is?
Mr. Trump,
He's
Ne-
going to India?
he's going to India next week, 24, 25.
Well, he is an ally of Prime Minister Modi. Trump is. Here, for those of you who are unaware, we have a very large South Asian population here in this community and in our city and state. And India,
Yeah.
for a long time, had the label, we're the oldest democracy, India has been the biggest democracy. But Prime Minister Modi, whose party is really more of a Hindu nationalist party, has now made changes that Muslims, and I think aside, are there more Muslims in India than in Pakistan?
Yes, please.
Yeah. And it's a huge population in India, even though Pakistan is a Muslim country and separate from India, but anyway, that they have to prove they were born in India and prove citizenship. A lot of people don't have those documents. So for many families right now in India, having to prove as Muslims that they belong in India has become a real problem. There's been changes, unilateral changes that he made in Kashmir, that are causing a lot of problems. But this idea of Hindu nationalism setting the tone and the rules for all of India is very difficult. And so I think there is such a thing in the world right now as the Trump effect. We're seeing more countries leaning toward authoritarianism, toward exclusion of others, and I can't blame them for all of it, but I think that they see an ally in the United States in President Trump when they initiate these kinds of activities. And so I'm sure he's going to go and be a big buddy of Prime Minister Modi and support him for the things that they're doing. Because here in the United States, just last week, he added 6 more countries to the Muslim ban. It's a real problem. Let me ask a question here, actually. How many of you personally were not born in the United States? Okay. How many of your parents were not born in the United States? How many of your grandparents were not born in the United States? Every room I go to, none of us, it's few of us, but most of us are not far from the immigrant experience. And that's who we are. Aside from the Native Americans, and by the way, we have the first 2 Muslim women in the United States, and the first 2 Native American women in the United States. We have a record number of women, still too small, 103 out of 435. But it's good. The diversity is just a beautiful thing. But we are a nation of immigrants. It used to say that on, what was it, Leslie, on the immigration and natural,
The USCIS, Citizenship and Immigration Services.
Citizenship and Immigration Services used to begin with the words, "We are a nation of immigrants." The Trump administration has taken those words out. They're just gone. They're not on the mission statement anymore. But that can't erase the fact that we really are a nation of immigrants. And the closing of the doors to refugees, people fleeing violence, the denigration of immigrants in the State of the Union, he was back to calling them murderers and rapists, people coming from the south of the border, is not good for our country and for the morale of our people, and for, even getting back to business. I mean, if you look at even the Fortune 500 and see who founded those companies, there's a lot of immigrants who are creating thousands and millions of jobs in this country. So, not good, yes.
This is my first time at one of these events, and I really appreciate your being here. Oh, sorry. This is my first time at one of these events, and I really appreciate your doing this and being here. How do you keep optimistic about what all is going on? And how do we?
I do think we're going to see some change in this country at the election time. But beyond that, I believe that most Americans are appalled when they see children separated from their families, from their mothers and fathers. I think people are upset because we have such tremendous income inequality in this democracy of ours, where the rich, we watch getting richer all the time, and the poor getting poorer, and the middle class being hollowed out, where it's really hard to make ends meet. People see that, and I think they want some real change in this country. People, as I mentioned earlier, are struggling to afford the health care and the medications that they need in this country. And if you look outside, our infrastructure is crumbling. We're going to offer in the House a big infrastructure bill that will create jobs and create more mass transportation and will fix roads and bridges that are falling down. And I believe that's supported by most Americans. And I think most Americans are not bullies and don't want leaders that are bullies and name callers and just putting people down all the time and racist and things like that. Anyway, I don't want, again, I'm trying to avoid the politics, but so it's my faith in the American people that really keeps me going, and because I get involved in campaigns also. Yes.
Hi. I have concerns about what our administration is doing studying the organizations such as the EPA, the State Department, the FDA, concerned about, that talks about environment, everything, our food supply, our water supply. I guess it's sort of a mini civics lesson here. Is there anything either that houses of Congress are doing in their committees or whatever to stop this? Or if you could expand on that?
Yes, and actually we were able to negotiate a strong bill for appropriations the last time. Things are trade-offs, but there were tremendous efforts to cut things. In the president's bill, about 3 million people would lose their SNAP program. That's the food stamp program. 3 million people. And I don't know, I can't remember the number of children that would lose school lunches. I believe we can stop that. And I believe that we can pass an appropriations bill, because we have to, that will create more fairness and opportunity for people. So we can make some progress, because appropriations bills have to initiate, spending bills have to initiate in the House of Representatives. They need the House of Representatives in order to pass a bill. And so it's going to have to be moderated to balance out military, which we were talking about earlier, and the we call it non-defense discretionary spending. And that's everything other than the military that needs to be funded. So yes, we can. Sure.
Thank you for taking questions. I have a question. My understanding is, and I'm afraid of, that we are losing our democracy and our freedom here. That's what we came here for, and we're losing it. So my question is, what does the Congress do to protect the democracy? I'm sure that there are reasonable Republicans that would like to keep the democracy. Unfortunately, this administration surrounded itself by the people who are only can say yes to Mr. President. So my question is, what the Congress, is there any plan, or is there anything the Congress can do to protect our democracy?
Yes, and we do have a plan, and we passed H.R. 1 that talked about protecting our democracy, getting some money out of politics, and all kinds of things that of thriving democracy depends on. I'm just going to tell you the reality in the Congress right now. I have friends on the other side of the aisle. I mean, we talk about family, and we talk about all kinds of everyday things. And we ride up in the elevator together to go vote into the House chambers. And as we ride, I see Republicans quite often eye-rolling at something the president may have said, or making sounds about it. But when that door of the elevator opens, they walk out in lockstep with the President of the United States. And it's fear that drives that. It's fear that they will be faced with a primary opponent, that they will end up being criticized on Twitter, that they will be outcasts. And so we're seeing people leaving the Congress because they've been in that position, and they feel that they can't continue. And it's really sad. And you're right. There are a lot of decent, respectful, small d Democratic Republicans who do care about our democracy, but it hasn't come through on the votes. It just has not. It's been really, really frustrating.
I'm going to do a quick rant rather than a question, just to echo what you're both saying. Anybody whose primary task at their job is keeping their job isn't doing their job, and we have to vote them out nationwide.
We were able to do that in 2018. So I have been in the Congress, and I thank many of you for this. I'm in my 22nd year, and I've taken that oath of office 11 times to protect the Constitution of the United States of America. Let me answer this question before. Wait, let me talk to him before you. I don't know what you're doing.
He's a reporter.
Just getting a name.
Okay, just a second. But, so we did win the majority. Of the 22 years, 6 have been in the majority. And so but I want to tell you, it's never been like this. I was there the whole George W. Bush era. And if you take out the war in Iraq, which I fought like hell against, we got stuff done on the domestic front. We were able to compromise because the definition at the time was to be a legislator was you can fight like hell, but at the end of the day, you compromise and get something done. That's not it anymore. They have people who say that, no, I didn't come here to compromise. I came here to shrink government, and then they've got a president who's threatening them all the time. So this is a unique moment in history. And I think it will be studied, and hopefully it'll be short-lived. But so yes, and we have been successful, and we are targeting big districts, and we are running candidates, and hopefully some of those individuals won't be back. Elections really matter. Elections really matter. Yeah.
Hi, Jan. We have a monarchy right now in our executive branch, and
He said that he wants to be a king, and that he can do anything he wants.
yes, and I'm concerned as to what the House is doing to try to continue investigating the things that he has done and continues to do that are really thoroughly impeachable in the House.
Yeah. So I'm not sure, I'm not on any of those committees, and I'm not sure exactly where this is going to go. One thing I am sure of is a lot of information is coming out through the media. There's a lot of, Bolton's book is going to come out. There's all kinds of new things that are unfolding. Whether or not we're going to, in the House, call more witnesses, I signed to a letter that the Attorney General should be impeached and that he should resign. It's really horrifying when you see the Attorney General going in and changing a sentence, just going in there and interfering in that way.
Barr is more of a concern than Trump because he's extremely devious. He tries to hide it.
Though, there's talk, and usually it comes true, that there's talk about his resignation coming. I don't know. And he did say the president, he can't function if the president keeps tweeting. I don't know. Who knows what that's really about or where that's coming. But I want to tell you that and I'll be here in a second, that a prominent Chicago lawyer said to me, if he were elected again, expect that there will be arrests of people who criticize the government, who criticize him, of journalists being arrested. I do believe that our democracy is at risk. I do. Anyway, yes.
Oh, is that encouraging?
Well, we can do something about it. We can do something about
I'll
it.
keep trying. Okay, I'm on a new subject for this room right now. About a month ago, the City Hall of Evanston passed a resolution that said, we want our government to renounce any use of nuclear weapons, to just get rid of nuclear weapons, to renounce first use of them, and a couple other provisions like that, to take the ability of one person to enact, inside, start a nuclear war. That happened in Evanston. What's going on? Is there anything going on in Congress about this?
What we have done is, and we have some Republican support, we'll go back next week, maybe we can do this, to say that the president has to come to Congress before engaging in any war. It doesn't specifically, any war. It doesn't specifically say nuclear, but.
Doesn't renounce nuclear or anything like that, so it's a different thing, yeah.
But, you know, the bulletin of atomic scientists who have that iconic doomsday clock,
Oh, yeah.
it's like seconds away from midnight right now. Seconds away.
Look who's got his hand on the button.
And he does, as president, have access to the nuclear codes. I mean, it is really a very scary prospect that an erratic, impulsive individual like this.
So will you speak on this issue publicly, in
Well,
Congress, out of Congress,
Well, I
please?
certainly have voted against it's the defense budget that ended up passing and included the use of low-yield nuclear
So did Mr. Obama.
weapons. And that's
Mr. Obama started that,
bad.
yeah, really.
Over here, Jim.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for being here and for letting me ask questions. So my question is, we've been like really begging that there's gonna be a change. Another report came out, nothing happened. The impeachment came, nothing. We are really hoping for the elections. How safe are we with the elections? What are we doing to really make sure that we can make a change?
Yeah, we actually did pass a bill on protecting elections too, but I've definitely talked to the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. I've talked to, we have a whole project at the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, that's the House races, and lots of lawyers that actually have won cases that have defeated efforts. Stacey Abrams, who's from Georgia, is leading an effort nationwide for the fair count. No, that's for the census. For a fair vote. She's also doing a fair count for the census. To really challenge all of these voter suppression methods. At the end of the day, we may have to figure out how we leap over those, how we get busloads of people to go and vote. I mean, we're going to have to be active on the ground, making sure that if they have people intimidating at polling places, that we have either law enforcement or ourselves out there to counter that. It may be, I think it's almost certainly going to be an issue, but I think that we have in place a lot of the safeguards, and we'll do better. Yeah, we're thinking about it too. Okay, I'm going to say thank you, thank you, thank you.